Hey everybody, welcome to the Unit 2 test review with me, Mr. Parsons, trying to get you ready for this upcoming test covering World War II, the Roaring Twenties, Spanish, American War, lots of great stuff involved here. So, let me get you going here. First off, let's jump into this. American imperialism. Yes, we kind of functioned as an empire for a while. How did we do that? Well, lots of people thought that there were good reasons to go support American imperialism, one of which being we wanted some natural resources. We really wanted to get a hold of what was out there for the world. Um, we still kind of do some of that today. Lots of people were opposed to American imperialism, though, going out and setting colonies, because we used to be a colony and we didn't really like the idea of being controlled or controlling other colonies. So it just kind of left a bad taste in our mouths having been a colony at one point. We didn't really want to do it to anybody else. So some of the reasons why we opposed American imperialism. But nonetheless, we end up embroiled in the Spanish-American War. Well, why did we decide to enter the war? A couple of good reasons. Yellow journalism being one, just plain old lies in the newspapers got us there at some point. Um, the Maine, explosion of the Maine, you guys all read about that. We suspected that that there was some foul play there, and protecting our own investments in Cuba. We really wanted to make sure that our sugarcane and other things like that, our investments in Cuba, were well cared for. So we decided to jump in the Spanish-American War. During the American War, what was it that killed the most U.S. soldiers? Was it the Battle of Manila? No. Was it the Battle of San Juan? Don't try again. Was it the invasion of Puerto Rico? Try again. Well, what was it? Yellow fever. Those pesky mosquitoes killed more U.S. soldiers than any other battles all put together. It was a rough place to go fight, and we weren't ready for those silly mosquitoes. Can be brought down by that tiny little bug. What were some of the terms of the treaty ending the Spanish-American War? Now that we made it through, what did we end up with? Well, Cuban independence was assured. We made sure that Cuba could be independent, and later they overthrew themselves and created a communist, so some people were like kicking themselves. But anyways, at the time, it was a really good thing for Cuba to be independent. The Philippines became a U.S. territory, but they really didn't like being a U.S. territory during, at the time. They really fought against it, so keep that in mind. After the Spanish-American War, kind of in the same time period, we gained a lot of new territory. We gained some new land in the U.S. in the 1800s that would eventually become states. Can you name those two states? Two of my favorite. One I have visited, one I have yet to, but I really want to. Alaska, great place to go fishing. It's a good thing we have that. We picked that up in the U.S. just so we have a nice vacation. These are like great vacation destinations. I think that's what we were thinking in the 1800s. Let's go on vacation. Let's go fishing in Alaska or chill on a beach in Hawaii, right? Which has never experienced U.S. occupation? Well, we've got the Dominican Republic, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, or Haiti. At Jamaica, our good friend Bob Marley has never experienced any U.S. occupation. All these other places, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and Haiti, we have actually spent some time occupying that country. Surprised you didn't know that. Alright, let's get into some presidential quotes. We had some big powerhouse presidents of the day that we studied about. So who said, today, more than ever before, American capital is seeking investment in foreign countries, and American products are more and more generally seeking foreign markets? That would be our big, good friend, William Howard Taft. He was one of the biggest U.S. presidents ever. He was a hefty dude. But he believed a lot in foreign investment, so we're going out and investing in foreign countries. Who said, a general association of nations must be formed under specific covenants for the purpose of affording mutual guarantees of political independence and territorial integrity to great and small states alike? Who was it that really wanted to make sure that every country, great and small, was well cared for. That's our good buddy Woodrow Wilson. We're going to talk about him quite a bit more when we start talking about 14 points in World War II. So keep an eye on those two. Hey, wait a second. I'm giving you extra credit. Have I lost my mind? Check it out. If you go to Unit 2, there is a Unit 2 extra credit quiz at the bottom of the menu. All you have to do is select the right answer, History Rocks, and you get 10 extra credit points. Go do it. Well, don't do it now, but do it when you're done watching this video. Let's talk about Latin America. Negotiations with Colombia resulted in the purchase of a 10-mile wide strip of land that led to President Theodore Roosevelt's greatest achievement. What was it? He dug the Panama Canal almost completely by himself. No, not really by himself, but he really made it happen. He had to do a lot of political pushing and things to make it happen. We're glad that he did. Now we have the Panama Canal. Makes life a whole lot easier for shipping, and we got to control it for quite a while. What is the name given to the extension of the Monroe Doctrine that one particular U.S. president used to justify intervention in Latin American affairs? Well, we were just talking about the guy. It's Senor Roosevelt again, and the Roosevelt corollary. One of his favorite quotes was to speak softly and carry a big stick. So there he is carrying his big stick and pulling along all of his little countries that he wants to be involved with down in Latin America. This Roosevelt corollary helped extend the Monroe Doctrine quite a bit. Best description for Woodrow Wilson's approach to foreign policy. We talked about Roosevelt, let's talk about Wilson. Well, Wilson was a lover, not a fighter. He wanted to use American idealism to promote world freedom, democracy, and peace. So Wilson is a lot like, if you take the philosophy of Superman, you know, truth, justice, and the American way, and you add a beauty queen, where she wants world peace, everything's all about world peace, that pretty much sums up Wilson's foreign policy. Basically believed that the American way was the way to go, and it could help solve all the world's problems, world peace. So Superman plus beauty queen equals good buddy Woodrow Wilson. So coming up on World War I, what role did the policies of isolationism and neutrality play in the U.S. decisions about World War I? Well, we really didn't want to get involved at first, so we wanted to be neutral. U.S. These policies really kept us out of the war for a long time. The roles of isolationism and neutrality. We wanted to be left alone. We wanted to be neutral. Did it last forever? No, but in the beginning at least, it helped us stay out of the war. It was a reason we stayed out. What was the effect of Germany's decision to allow unrestricted submarine warfare? Well, one of the reasons we got into the war eventually was because Germany, using unrestricted submarine warfare, took out the Lusitania, and 128 American lives were taken in that event, and it really galvanized the country and made us all want to go to war against Germany and the other their allies. What's the ultimate impact of U.S. participation in World War I on Germany and its allies? Well, at the time when we jumped in, everybody was kind of at a stalemate. Us jumping in, throwing our manufacturing might and a whole bunch of new fresh soldiers at the problem, really led us toward the end of the war. It tipped the balance, and November 11th, 1917, we end up with Armistice Day. World War I at home. Well, let's talk about what happened at home. What impact did the U.S. entry into World War I have on labor and production? We ended up with sending a whole bunch of our boys overseas, so there was nobody left to work in the factories. Well, actually there were. A whole bunch of women and minorities really picked up the slack there and started this new manufacturing, really picked up the manufacturing might of the U.S. So kudos to them. What did the federal government do to generate support for the America's role in World War I? Well, during World War I at home, there was lots of propaganda, and most of it was put out there by the Committee on Public Information. I mean, you can look at a picture like this, and that makes me want to go to war right now. Let's get rid of this mad brute. So, it's Committee on Public Information. Their job was to generate support for the U.S., and they did that through some really important propaganda. What are the Food Administration, the War Industries Board, and the Railroad Administration examples of? These all came about during World War I. They're all examples of expanding government power, especially during crises, during wartime. Happens in every government, happened in ours throughout history a number of times. So anytime we get into a crisis, the U.S. government has a tendency to expand its power. What was one way that the government exerted power to reduce debate and dissent over U.S. participation in World War I? We really didn't want people to spend too much time chatting about it and make sure that we're all on board. Well, they passed this Espionage and Sedition Acts, so started to um, root out spies among us. Have we done things like this in recent history? Well, take a look at the Patriot Act. The same kind of thing has happened. In times of crises, in times of national security threats, we have a tendency to back off a little bit on our civil rights. So, just something to think about. How did the Great War end? Well, some of the key points of the Treaty of Versailles stripped Germany of its overseas colonies and required Germany to pay reparations. They had to pay back everybody that was involved in the war. What else did the treaty require? Well, Germany had to admit guilt. They really didn't like that. They didn't want to tell everybody that they had started the war. Another reason, one of the major reasons that the Treaty of Versailles was ratified by everybody except for the U.S. Wilford Woodruff brings it home, and almost everybody. Wilford Woodruff brings it home, and the Congress didn't want anything to do with it. U.S. Senate's failure to ratify the Treaty of Versailles, their biggest reason was they really didn't like the idea of the League of Nations. They didn't want to give up any of their political power to any other entity. Congress wanted to keep it all within the United States. They felt like the League of Nations might take up some of their political power. So, nope, they X'd it. They said, no way, Treaty of Versailles. Take your 14 points and take a hike, Wilson. But let's take a look at Wilson's 14 points anyways. You guys need to take a little bit of time to review his 14 points and his speech to Congress on January 8th. Here's an excerpt of it here. All the peoples of the world are in effect partners in this interest. And for our own part, we see very clearly that unless justice be done to others, it will not be done to us. The program of the world's peace, therefore, is our program. And that program, the only possible program as we see it, is this. And a number of the 14 points are open diplomacy, freedom of the seas, association of nations, and an end to economic power barriers between countries. So he really, again, was looking for that world peace. Truth, justice, the American way, and world peace. He's a bit of a beauty queen. After the war, we get into this great era called the Roaring Twenties. Why are the 20s sometimes called an age of prosperity? Well, gross national product went up. We were very prosperous. We had to help rebuild Europe, and so we sold them tons of stuff, and it made us fairly rich. Industry and technology, and the U.S. becomes a creditor nation. We end up giving out loans to a number of these countries rather than taking money from countries, rather than borrowing, money from countries. So that's how we end up making quite a bit of money during the 20s. What did the automobile have to do with it? Well, auto ownership increases dramatically. It goes from, maybe somebody in town has a car to almost everybody in town has a car during the 20s. So we become this is where we really start to pick up the U.S. culture of freedom and the ability to move about the country anytime we want. How did technology change American life in the 1920s? Well, you can imagine the advent of radios, telephones, and indoor plumbing can have a huge impact on your life. Finally, you can be connected with everybody whenever and wherever you want, even if it's while you're in the bathroom. Maybe just make sure you don't use them all at the same time. That possibly has gone too far in our day and age. Don't use your phone in the bathroom. Probably not a good choice. Alright, big changes during the 20s. Let's talk about some literary styles. New techniques in art and photography and talking pictures are all examples of a 20s cultural trend called modernism. Lots of emphasis on freedom, vibrant colors, etc. Youth culture changed during the 20s. What? Because they had more time in school? Huh? How did that happen? Well, in the 20s, people started to stay in school longer. Prior to the 20s, you might get a 3rd or 4th grade education and then go to work. Later, after starting in the 20s and beyond, kids were staying in school longer, getting more of an education. So you start to develop this culture of kids, being at school for certain hours of the day, coming home, having free time, having summers off, spending time together, and not working. They're not turned into adults so quickly, so you get this youth culture after the 20s, sort of what you know now. What was the name for the 20s African American cultural movement? that included some literature, drama, music, art, and dance. Was it jazz? No, not necessarily. It was the Harlem Renaissance, not to be confused with the Harlem Shake. No. Harlem Renaissance back in the 1920s. How did the roles of women change in the 1920s? We talked a little bit about women gaining more control of their finances in the factories and things like that. We're talking about flappers in the 1920s, different styles in the 1920s, not so restrictive styles. So do a little bit of research into how the roles of women changed in the 20s for this particular test. Talk about some civil conflicts that arise post 1920s, before World War II. There were lots of groups that objected to immigration. They responded to the Red Scare, the Communist Scare, and they also believed that white Protestants were better than others, two of which in particular were the nativists and the Ku Klux Klan. Most of you are pretty familiar with those guys. Some other civil conflict. This was quite a fight, quite a battle for a long time in the U.S. A ban on the sale of alcohol and an increase in organized crime thereafter because everybody was bootlegging alcohol during the 1920s. We have the 18th Amendment, which is more commonly known as Prohibition. So, 36th state ratifies the Dry Amendment on January 16th, and the U.S. has voted dry. Some other civil conflict of the day. We had a little bit more time to think about this kind of thing during the 1920s. The Scopes trial. Well, the biggest idea behind that was evolution versus science. Evolution versus religion. Science versus religion. Should we be teaching in schools about evolution, or should we be teaching creationism? Should those fundamental ideals be put together? And this fight's still going on today, but it came to a really important trial and it came to a head during this time period. Talk about the presidencies of Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover. Three guys that were really big on business. These guys believed that big business was America's strength. They very much promoted private business and foreign investment and trying to create this great capitalist state. Well, some people believe that some of their policies may have contributed to the crash of 1929 and some of the things that happened later on with the Great Depression, but at the time things were rolling really well, the roaring 20s, thanks to some of these guys and their policies. That's it. Good luck to you on this test. Things are going to go well. You're going to ace it. Congratulations already.